Conditions May Apply by CinnamonPinecones. Read by Distracted by Books. Chapter 140. Here we go again. Izuku was right. He didn't sleep. Hardly even a wink. He rested to some degree, but at this point, he was used to the exhaustion. He had the day off, for the most part, and he wished he had his homework to work on, or anything, actually. They were scheduled to have their first nighttime patrol today, so he was stuck here, doing a whole lot of nothing, until Endeavor, Todoroki, and Vernon were scheduled to show up at 8 p.m. It was currently 8 a.m. He sighed heavily into the stiff bunk bed beneath him. Todoroki had texted him back an hour and a half ago, but it didn't make him feel any better. He just said he was fine and apologized for sleeping through his text message. Izuku knew it was a load of bullshit, but it wasn't like there was anything he could do about it. Around 10 a.m., all the other bunk occupants had left for their patrol shifts, and Izuku did his best to let the currently empty room calm him enough to actually sleep. Even though anyone could walk in at any time, he still managed to get in a few hours until someone came back into the room and passed out on a bunk on the far wall. The door opening startled him awake, and he figured that was the best he was going to get here. He was glad Todoroki had invited him over to his house. He knew what a week of sleeping like this would do to him, and he would like to avoid that if at all possible. He still had a little over 7 hours before patrol tonight, and he killed a few of them in one of the training rooms, but he was hesitant to exhaust himself. His hero uniform, sans the armor and belt, looked close enough to a tracksuit that he figured he could get away with wearing it in public, so he set out to explore the city. Hosu was a big place, and he did better in environments he was familiar with. The patrols they had taken already covered a good bit of the map, but there were still some blind spots, so he was making a point to fill those in. Come tonight's patrol, he was going to be very glad he took the time to do this. Several hours into his wandering, his stomach reminded him that he had not eaten anything in the last 29 hours. He should probably do that. It was around dinner time, and he hadn't had anything since lunch yesterday. He missed Fuyumi's cooking, but the canteen at Endeavor's agency was the only place within walking distance he was going to get food without stealing it, because he steadfastly refused to spend the money Eraser gave him. So he headed back. The few remaining hours he had left to wait seemed to stretch on into eternity. But thankfully, the clock kept ticking. And eventually, 8 p.m. rolled around. He waited in the locker room for Todoroki, and, against his better judgment, he took a creepy stalker picture of the bruise blooming on his bicep. It felt disgusting, but he was mostly clothed, and Izuku needed as much evidence as he could get. Aside from the bruise, Todoroki looked no different than he usually did, which wasn't reassuring. How often did this happen for him to look so unfazed? He did his best to shove his concerns to the back of his mind. He had a solid case, but now was not the time to discuss it. They both needed to be focused for patrol, and regardless, he wasn't letting Todoroki go home without him. He would be safe tonight if it was the last thing Izuku did. He couldn't imagine Endeavor would insist on training after an 8 p.m. to 4 a.m. shift. So he would talk to Todoroki when they got back to his house. Or would it be better to wait until the internships were over? Whatever, he'd play it by ear. It was difficult to face Endeavor without giving in to the urge to inflict severe blunt force trauma, but somehow Izuku managed. He stayed as far away from him as possible, and it seemed like Vernon noticed his poorly concealed fury, but no one else in the party did. He just let her think that it was because he had been ditched at the agency last night. They were able to traverse the city more freely with the normal bustlers of the day back in their homes for the night. so they covered ground quicker. That's not to say the streets were empty, though. There was no lack of pickpockets and purse snatchers, but Izuku was hesitant to stop the former. He didn't want Endeavor to get mad that Izuku was the only one to have noticed them, but in all fairness, you learn how to spot pickpockets quite well when they were the constant threat to your livelihood. He had successfully managed to stop the first one he saw with a pointed glare and a flick of his eye toward Endeavor. But he just let the second one go. The perp looked down on his luck, and the man he stole from looked wealthy enough to spare it. Izuku wasn't going to risk Todoroki's safety over a nicked wallet from a rich man. Incidents were minimal for the first hour and a half, which, of course, is when everything went shit. Suddenly, the air grew tense. Something shifted. He couldn't say what, but it gave him a headache. Before he could even begin to question it, a horrible shriek that he had heard echoing in his dreams for the past month sounded out a few blocks away. A glance toward Todoroki told him that he wasn't going crazy. The fear in his eyes was mirrored. That was a Nomu. Survival instinct told him to run the other way, but something stronger had him running toward it. Endeavor had already taken off, and Vernon was staying back to make sure they were following. They got to the source of the awful screaming just in time to see a couple torn apart. The blood on the concrete and the sight of that vile creature made something in him snap, but it was too little, too late. The couple were dead, and Endeavor was incinerating the Nomu before Izuku could move a muscle. He may be a shit human, but he was a damn effective hero. Some part of him wanted to hold out hope that it was over, but in his gut, he knew it wasn't. Both Shoto and Vernon were looking between the eviscerated couple, the ashes of the Nomu, and Endeavor, standing in the middle of it all with an unmasked expression of terror and revulsion. The eerie moment of silence was broken when monstrous roars and visceral screams of horror started coming from all directions. The cacophony pulled them from their trance, and Izuku's resolve planted itself firmly. They aren't human. Kill them. He ordered all three of them before gunning it to the closest cries he could hear. Patrol was more lively tonight. Hitoshi had helped stop a mugging, and Eraser had noticed a pickpocket and intervened. They'd chased off a group of vandals and brought in someone who was stumbling around and smelling heavily of, well, Hitoshi didn't know, but it was certainly drugs, and a lot of them, if the man's behavior was anything to go off of. He was getting into the groove of things. He wouldn't say he was comfortable, but that was probably for the best. A healthy amount of trepidation was a good thing. He was beginning to get somewhere adjacent to relaxed when something in Aizawa's pocket buzzed and his spine went stiff. Hitoshi was about to ask what was going on when all the color drained from Aizawa's face as he read something on his phone, and he immediately broke out into a sprint. It was all Hitoshi could do to keep up, so he kept his questions to himself for now. He wanted to ask where they were going, but he didn't really have the breath for it, and Aizawa ended up answering his question anyway. He was holding his phone up to his ear and talking to someone on the other end. Meet me at the residential area off Block 32. Wait, that was his neighborhood. Yeah, that was certainly the direction they were headed in. What the hell was going on? Would the train be faster? They might have the route cut off. No, Zashi, I don't care what traffic laws you have to break. Get here now. ETA 10 minutes. Tell them your address, kid. Aizawa barked into the phone before aiming the last statement to Hitoshi and passing the phone over. He did his best to pant out the address to whoever was on the other end of the line. Was that Yamada-sensei? And handed the phone back to Aizawa. He expected him to continue the conversation somehow, but he just hung up and doubled down on sprinting. Sweet goodness, Hitoshi had to work on his cardio. The only thing keeping him in stride with Aizawa was the look of fear he had seen in his sensei's eyes. He had only seen that look once before, And it was when he was concussed out of his mind at the USJ. So if Aizawa was booking it, then so was Hitoshi. When they got back to his house, there was not a car waiting for them, a fact which Aizawa was not pleased by if the muttered curses were anything to go off of. Hitoshi took a second to force air into his shriveled lungs, and Aizawa seemed to have somewhat composed himself by the time Hitoshi was able to speak. What? He didn't even get the question out before Aizawa answered him. There's an attack in progress north of here. We're not in danger, but I need to report there ASAP, he explained, not nearly as out of breath as Hitoshi felt that he should be. That did not answer his questions. Well, it answered a few of them, but it was not enough of an explanation for the 12 minutes of torture he just put his body through. He was pretty sure he could taste blood. Where? He asked. Aizawa looked hesitant to reply, which was confusing to him. He could just Google it. Why was he trying to keep the information from him? Hosu, he answered after a brief moment of contemplation. It took him a moment to put all the pieces together. Something about Hosu was significant, but he couldn't figure out what it was until it hit him like a truck. Hosu was where Endeavor's agency was. Midoriya. He was sure the color drained from his face because Aizawa's expression softened before he spoke. Get inside, he instructed gently. He had about 1,000 more questions, but before he could voice any of them, a car came screeching down the street. Yeah, sure enough, that was Present Mike. Aizawa wasted no time getting to the passenger seat. He sent one more firm command to get inside before the door shut and the car peeled down the road. He stood there, dumbstruck for a moment, but his mom must have heard the squealing tires because he heard her voice call down to him from a window upstairs. Toshi? He barely had the breath to choke out one-word questions to Aizawa, so he certainly didn't have the breath to yell up to his mom and explain what was happening. Inside. He should get inside. He needed to check the news. Standing here wasn't helping anyone. Kohaku was curled up in bed, half asleep and barely reading, when a spike of fear cut through her mind like a red-hot knife. It wasn't the most unusual thing to have happened. She had grown used to other people's emotions bleeding into her with no warning, but this was violent. It was damn near debilitating. It was the exact same feeling that had gripped her when Yue had called about the break-in on campus. A nauseating dread that she was about to lose someone precious, that her son was dead. Back then, the person on the other end of the line was quick to assure her that Hitoshi was fine. But this time the feeling didn't stop. She was about to get up and check on the neighbors when the feeling doubled and the screech of tires sounded out from in front of the house. When she made her way to the window to see what was going on, a car was burning rubber down the street again, and Toshi was standing in the front yard, trying to catch his breath. Thankfully, the feeling faded as the car left, but Toshi was still standing there, scared and lost. Toshi, she called out to him. He looked up at her and said nothing before turning away and marching into the house. When she got downstairs, Hitoshi was standing in the living room, wearing his full hero gear, shoes and all, and he had the news on. The newscaster was reporting on something banal, and Hitoshi was ignoring it as he flicked through another news site on his phone. She had questions on the tip of her tongue, but her attention was interrupted by the newscaster on the TV, stuttering before a banner on the bottom in bright red font said, "Breaking news." This just in. I'm getting word of an incident in Hosu. There seems to be an attack spanning several blocks on the north side of the city. Some sort of creature is on the prowl, several creatures, and they are violent. Anyone currently in Hosu should take cover and stay inside. Lock and barricade doors if possible. Several heroes are already on scene. Endeavor, chief among them. We've got a chopper on site, which we will cut to in a moment, but viewer discretion is advised. Kohaku's heart dropped at the mention of Endeavor. Midoriya was with Endeavor. Several of Toshi's classmates were there, right? When the camera cut to an aerial view of the city, she felt a fear that wasn't hers spike dramatically. Toshi went pale as he stared at the screen. Again, she didn't get the chance to even ask what was going on before she got an answer. Nomu, the USJ, those things. No, 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 no. Hitoshi spoke in fractured sentences, and the breath he had barely caught was coming shallow and quick again. Nomu, the thing that had gone toe-to-toe with All Might? There had to be at least 5 of them within the limited view of the TV screen. This was not good. Why the hell was Midoriya always in the middle of this kind of thing? End of chapter.